Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Jack, back again to talk about the dungeons for Season 3 of Dragonflight and which ones I think are going to be really good, which ones I think may not be that good, as well as what classes and what the meta would probably be based off what the encounters are giving us, the trash mobs are giving us, and so on. We saw how Priest in Season 2 is insanely good because so many things could be Mind Soothe. There was tons of application to Mass Dispel, right? In here, I want to go over the same thing, talking about what specs classes in general are going to be very good. Starting it off, let's go over Everbloom. Mind Soothe still really good in this dungeon. There's a lot of humanoids and a lot of caster type mobs, but there's also a lot of beasts and elementals, especially elementals in this dungeon. Some of these are also elites that deal really heavy like tank damage, and they are also patrolling. So there's a lot of ways where it might be difficult to be able to skip some of those mobs, especially if they're updating them to also have True Sight, so that could also be kind of a pain. The second boss is like a council encounter that you have to fight up against, which looks to be very kick heavy. That's another priority where they're kind of just like spamming bolts all the time. I'm not sure if something like that is going to stay, but if there's infinite scaling and you're infinitely getting hit by bolts because you don't have enough kicks, it could be really, really annoying as a boss encounter. The third boss is a mage, which is really, really cool because there's lots to dodge and lots to like play around. So I'm excited about that one. There also was like a spider boss, which was optional back in the day. So I'm curious if that boss is going to be optional or not. And then the final boss has a pretty insane stun where I ended up having to get myself unstuck when I was running around in the dungeons at Mythic 0 level. But it's cool. You're stomping around flowers, you're killing off the final boss and trying to burn it down as quick as you can while you're breaking out your allies. Some really fun mechanics in Everbloom that I'm really excited about. But there's also a lot of skip potential in this dungeon, a lot of customization for how your route can be working. And back in the day, you would basically get people on like 2-seater mounts or 3-seater mounts and jump up like hills and walls to be able to skip around mobs. And that might still happen. It'd probably be even easier when you have an evoker to do the rescue and get all of that done for you right away. But it also could mean that Rogue would be really, really powerful because I don't think that Shroud existed back in Warlords of Draenor. Citation needed onto that one. But Everbloom, super excited about. Oh boy, Throne of the Tides. This dungeon is probably one of the biggest ones that I am really concerned about. Some of the mobs are really annoying looking. There's also a mind control boss that you have to like break out your allies and deal with. You're also having a lot of casters where there's chain lightnings, which at infinite scaling could probably be doing insane damage. They also are having mobs that are casting hexes on you. And it feels, in many ways, very similar to Vortex Pinnacle, where there is not a lot of potential for trash skips. There's not a lot of route variety that you have an opportunity to deal with. And there's mobs that just have a lot of annoying abilities that you need to be interrupting as well. There's a Curse Dispel that we saw featured at the Heroic or Mythic 0 level, whatever it is, that can also be removed by like things like Freedom and Tiger's Lust that we noticed. So that was kind of cool, but oh my god, the downtime in the elevator is so freaking annoying. I actually have no idea what they're supposed to be doing with this dungeon. If somebody like misses the elevator, God forbid, you're waiting like 30 or 40 seconds for somebody in your group to be able to come around and give you a hand. There technically is a portal. So what you do is you go in, you go upstairs, you kill the boss there, and then you can take like a portal back down. Maybe that portal's just going to be up to begin with or something, but that's super frustrating. Really difficult to get any sort of Mind Soothe value. You're having a lot of elementals all over the place. There is some humanoids that you have that you could potentially be skipping, but they're also sort of guarded by more aberrations or elementals. So that's also where, you know, you may not really have any options with how you route through this dungeon. And when you have downtime and things to just wait for elevators and wait for RP, that does not sound very appealing either. So we'll see when this dungeon actually comes out at a Mythic Plus level. There's a lot of updates, I think, that are needed for Throne of the Tides, and it's the one dungeon that I am definitely not looking forward to, at least at the moment. I also wanted to give a big shout out to our sponsor for this video, Status Audio, for their Between 3 ANC earbuds. I've had these earbuds for a few weeks now at this point, and I've been using them primarily to go to the gym. The noise canceling and also the option to be able to turn it on and off has been fantastic. The noise canceling quality is up to 38 decibels, so when I turn it on in the gym, I'm not hearing like the overall music or sound. It's actually just quiet and relaxing. It also has a ridiculously long battery life at this point. I've had these, like I said, for about 2 or 3 weeks, and I don't think I've had to charge them once at all. You're able to just use the touch feature at the very top to be able to change music, up your audio, change songs. So huge thank you to Status Audio for sending these out to me, giving me the opportunity to test them, and for sponsoring our video. If you guys want to get a discount and support the content, be sure to check it out in the description down below. I don't know about you guys, but I'm actually kind of burnt out on Darkheart Thicket. I think Darkheart Thicket is just like kind of overdone at this point. We played it a whole bunch all throughout Legion, and they sort of like brought it back during Shadowlands for that Legion M Plus kind of week. I understand why they're bringing it back for this coming season. Mindsoothe, we'll say, pretty decent at the start, but there's lots of beasts, demons, elementals, and in particular, there is this highlight really of why Rogue was so good in Legion, even BFA as well, was because when you have this variety of just mobs all over, only Rogue is going to be able to get you past it. I don't know if Mage's Mass Invis is going to be a viable option, if that's going to be a consideration, but that's definitely something I'm going to be thinking of in the back of my head as well. There's a lot of required trash kills, mobs that you need to be able to find some kind of way to be able to deal with. At the very beginning, you have these giant bears that you would have like Mindsoothe skips for back in the day, just to be able to like get around them, because if you actually fought them, they would just annihilate you. Not a huge fan of like having these insanely difficult mobs that really high-end groups are going to be able to skip with these, but then your average pug is going to deal with, and it's just going to be like disgusting, you know? I hate that kind of disparity between the ability to skip monsters, right? Killing the eyeball elementals to spawn Oakheart, the tree boss, that was never really fun. It's kind of just rounding up a bunch of caster mobs and then rolling through as many AoE stops that you have possible. Not a huge fan there. Xavius has some ground effects, which I think are in desperate need of updating. He has this mechanic where you either like stack or you spread based on which one you get. And they're pretty tough to be able to see when it's like purpley red on purpley red. So I hope that's something that actually gets updated quite a bit, because it's like just like Uldaman, where it's like, oh, well, sorry, didn't see this thing, and your run is bricked. Black Rook Cold. I kind of feel like this is similar with Legion Dungeons, where, yeah, you know, like I had my fill of it, but I'm sure people who did not play back then are going to enjoy this one as well. Skips. Well, Rogues stay winning. Once again, lots of undead in this dungeon, so you're not going to have as much value from Mindsoothe. And the early part of the dungeon where you want to skip some of the elite mini-boss mobs, I really hope that they do something to actually incentivize you to kill these mobs or fight them, because we pretty much never did back in Legion. But of course, big value there if you have Mage Mass Invis, Rogue Stealth, or like pre-Invis Pot, maybe might be able to get you far enough if you have like a Druid Roar or something to help you along the way. On the second boss, you're fighting this Demon Hunter, in fact, and they put out a really nasty bleed. I always remember this bleed just trucking people. Now, when you're in a world with Evoker being able to Cauterizing Flame, it makes a ridiculous difference, because that bleed would continue to stack on players throughout the encounter. So you would have these boss fights back in the day where you'd have like 3 or 4 stacks of bleed on those enemies. So hopefully there's going to be some kind of cap to that bleed damage, or something that they sort of mitigate so it doesn't make Evoker be absolutely required. Damage reduction just in general is really good for this dungeon, because the third boss, Smash Spite, has just really big stomps that deal tons of damage. He also has these like fire lines that drop from these strafing like demon birds that come out. I didn't show it in the footage here, but basically you'd have to like look up into the sky, see where the bird is before it drops a line of fire across the room, and how you position and how you bait it makes a big difference, especially in tyrannical weeks. And that is just like, it's just like this skill gap diff, basically, of like elite players will be able to do that, yeah, but average Joe is just going to be wandering through vast pools of fire and having a terrible time in this dungeon. And having dungeon mechanics like that, where players who are introduced to it for the first time may not even know that's how that works, is just not a good thing at all. So hopefully they update that. We also have like the fell lines that Ilizana, where she was the second Demon Hunter boss, where she's applying bleeds and she's also just generally doing damage. They need to have like updated animations so that you know where the fell lines are going, you know like what damage you're going to take hopefully all of that stuff gets updated because there's quite a bit that should be. While I am extremely excited for Waycrest Manor, oh my goodness, I hope that they open up all the doors from the very beginning, okay? Having your routes forcibly changed on you, having some routes where it feels like you can chest one key level higher, all that stuff is just very frustrating. And they should be working on balancing the trash percentage and like difficulty of mobs, as well as making sure that like there's good variety and options for how you can be pulling this dungeon, because it's a really sick dungeon. You're going to be able to be in like all these narrow hallways, which is also frustrating whenever we get back to Sanguine weeks. That's something that still exists, unfortunately. But when it comes to the boss fights, Waycrest Triad, there's 3 witches and they all have different abilities on hand. There's a lot of kicks on this boss fight, and I always hated it back in the day. Not a fan whatsoever. But the thorns mechanic, and when you have to like move and jump just to be able to get good value or to like reduce the damage you take, that stuff's pretty fun. But there's also a heal reduction mob where you're just trying to like mitigate and reduce as much damage. I hope that they nerf that a bit, because that was always one of the worst. Granted, that was also really rough when like Grievous and other nastier affixes existed back in the day, so we'll see. Soulbound Goliath, whenever you set the tree basically on fire, he would spawn these ads, and they would sort of like spew out of him all over the place. And as a healer, you would get aggro just by healing. And there's no way to like have a tank taunt them or anything. And so if you didn't really run very far away, these mobs would kind of just spew out 360 degrees out of the Goliath and then find you and beat you down. So I hope that there's some kind of way to update that, because again, people who are not familiar with those mechanics, it's not really well telegraphed at all. And I hope that they make the fight a little less bursty, and then they make the boss kind of like burn longer, or put like a dot on everybody that lasts longer, so it's less burst and more rot. That would be pretty great. Mechanic wise, because I always remember health bars going from like 100 to 30 to 90 to 40 to, you know, back and forth, like yo-yoing like crazy back in the day. And I hope that it's not going to be something like that. I don't know if it's something that I saw snaps just because they were on like heroic or mythic 0 difficulty, and it doesn't work for mythic plus, but I would kind of reiterate and double check on what their status is actually going to be for stacking mobs all together on top of each other using snap mechanics, basically. That is a really major function in terms of how difficult these mobs in Waycrest are going to be. Being able to also have your tank snap mobs to allow you to skip trash was also a decent factor as well, so something to kind of consider. Awakening was really insane as a seasonal affix because it helped so much for being able to do trash skips in dungeons like Waycrest Manor. Not only Waycrest Manor, but also Atal'Dazar. Once again, snapping going to be kind of a concern as to like whether or not this is actually possible. The Raptors dealt insane amounts of damage back in the day. I can't emphasize how much damage they actually dealt. It was pretty much going to murder you. If you did not snap them, they would probably just kill the rest of your party instantly. Tanks are super, super strong. Once they started getting some of the power in BFA, especially later BFA, and they could take the brunt of those hits. But everybody else absolutely could not. And so whatever their plan is going to be for Atal'Dazar and Waycrest Manor, we really need to hear about that, because trying to fight off all of those little raptor jumps and infinitely scaling content is going to be really, really tough. I will say it does feel nice to have Mind Soothe when it goes to the left side wing, but those are also historically like the actual troll mobs, the Zandalari troll mobs. You would fight a lot of those, in fact, and the ones you would not fight are guarded by this big elemental colossus, basically, which you would not be able to skip. So that's kind of something that you need to keep in mind. The right side wing with the undead and the disease mobs was always torturous. I don't know what exactly they're going to do there. I hope that they make them give insane amounts of trash percentage or something. This is a dungeon that does give you a lot of choice, but as players at the high end get a lot better, you also got to make sure that you're not making certain strategies available to super high-end players, but super difficult for, you know, mid-level players or new players to be able to execute. And then you have vast disparities in the difficulty of a dungeon based off of some of the skill gap differences. So that's something to keep in mind. Atal'Dazar got to be a lot better of a dungeon when Awakening was around, and part of that is because of how the skips worked. Something to consider. And Dawn of the Infinite being the final 2 dungeons that we have for the incoming season. There's going to be a decent amount of kicks required. There's that mind control that you can do, which casts like a tank buster, and you need to like purge or dispel the tank. You're able to actually mind control that mob and then use it to like one-shot bosses. They got to do something about that. Maybe make that mob immune to mind control or something. There's a lot of dragons, so there is some mind soothe potential where you can start skipping around the dragons. I am kind of concerned about how much trash percentage that there is, because it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of variety in the trash pulls that you have on hand. Keep in mind the mechanics for Dawn of the Infinite are also going to be scaled down. If you've like done the new dungeon like twice and you've never done it since, there's a heroic version which downgrades the mechanics. And I believe the heroic version of Dawn in 10.1.7 is going to be like the same mechanic level as what we're going to see in Mythic Plus going forward. So keep that in mind. There is an overly large amount of mechanics in the Mythic 0 level for a reason, because they have hard mode kind of like baked into it from the beginning. The sort of like slow periods where you're running through sand and clearing out the atrium, or whatever you want to call it, the anti-room, before you're fighting the like time boss, that is super slow and annoying to play around. It limits your pulls. It really benefits a lot of like hyper mobile tanks, or just people who can wade into the sand, pull mobs, pull them back. Not a huge fan of that at all, really. I hope they find some kind of way to optimize that a little bit better. The trash before tier is incredibly nasty because it's kind of just like chocked full of mini bosses that are doing tons of damage, require more coordination. And of course you have the gauntlet, which I assume is still going to stay in the instance, but boy, is that going to be very toxic for, again, the average player doing a timed instance run and trying to be able to make their way through. So I am interested if they're going to like reduce the amount of mobs that are in that gauntlet to make it a little bit easier for Mythic Plus, or just say good luck. I'd be very interested to see how that's going to go. In general, I think that there's a ridiculous amount of kicks, and there's a ridiculous amount of emphasis on trash skips. So bringing back these old dungeons is really good, but sometimes you view these old dungeons through the lens of when the times were at their best. Namely, when you had Awaken to allow you to skip past mobs and skip past entire packs without needing a rogue or needing invis pots. And when those affixes no longer exist, it might just reinforce a meta that is very restrictive by requiring a rogue. And when then we get back into the BFA days where every single composition had a rogue, we accepted it and we were just kind of fine with it. I get it, it's not a bad thing when rogue is good. I'm not trying to go after rogue players here, but we're just going to be leaving a situation where an Exodia comp dominated everything and was required. And I don't really want to go into a new meta where it's just more of the same in that regard. Rogue, I hear, is getting AoE stops, it's getting reduced cooldown on Shroud, getting more buffs. That's great, but I don't want to have to wait every single dungeon before I have a rogue player just to be able to do it. Having that sort of meta happen once again is something I'm not a big fan of. So we'll see on hand. I don't think that Mind Soothe is going to be nearly as powerful as it was previously, which is a good thing. But I think it might actually just get replaced by the Shroud and maybe Mass Invis type meta to come forward. So we'll see. I do think lots of melee are going to be needed and are going to be required, and are hopefully not going to be killed by random ass like fervent strikes or random ass strikes that you'd see out of things like Brackenhide Hollow as well. So that's also going to be a big +1. We'd love to see more melee. If you have any questions, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're enjoying this content, want to see more of it. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it, and I'll catch you all next time.